Good afternoon, students. This is Ms. Kawana, your tutor in history. We are going through History Module 1, Exam-Based Contact class for 2022. My mobile number is 081-361-4895. My email address is irene.kawana18@gmail.com. Welcome to History Module 1. I wish you all to be hardworking, dedicated, and self-driven students in this course. This presentation covers the subject content in brief and some general guidelines that I want everyone to keep in mind when preparing for examination 2022. The content of the exam-based presentation is: first, we have the Treaty of Versailles. Number 2, we have the League of Nations. Number 3, we have the collapse of international peace. Spelling error there, supposed to be the collapse of international peace, not internal peace. Sorry for that. And then we have the Cold War. Then we have the Namibian under German rule and Namibia under South African. First of all, we have the Treaty of Versailles. We want to go through Clemenceau and Wilson's disagreement during the peace conference, and then the motives of the Big Three in 1919, as we know that this Big Three met in 1919 in Paris to sign the treaty. And then we are going through Clemenceau's aims at the peace settlements in 1919 and how the Germans disliked the TOV, and here we have the German military force. The treaty caused bitterness, hatred in Germany, and the peacemakers of 1919 coped successfully. And then we have Britain, France, and USA, whether they were satisfied with the terms of the treaty. First of all, let's look at the disagreement between the two. As we know that George Clemenceau and Woodrow Wilson, they were from different countries. The way the First World War affected France is not the way the Americans were affected. As we all know that the First World War happened in the French soil. So these two has disagreement on how to punish the Germans. First of all, let's talk about Wilson, Woodrow Wilson from USA. Woodrow Wilson, he wanted to have future peace. He wanted peace. He wanted a fair treaty to the winners of the war and the losers, because he wanted to avoid war at all costs. And then he wanted to work to make the world a safer place to be. And then he wanted to punish Germany for aggression, but avoid forcing her to pay a huge amount. We all know that the Germans were blamed for starting the First World War. So Woodrow Wilson, he wanted them to be punished but not severed, because he was scared that if we are going to give them a heavy reparation, when they will recover, the Germans will start another war. So he wanted to avoid another war at all costs. And then that's why he wanted a fair treatment between the Allied powers and those who lost, the Central Powers, who lost the war. And now we have George Clemenceau from France. He was a prime minister, and this one was the one who wanted a revenge. Why? Because at first, it was not the first time when the German people attacked France. At first, they attacked them and then they lost. So this time when Germany went, it was for the second time. So he wanted a revenge for the French suffering. He said that his people were killed, soldiers were killed, civilians were killed, the buildings were destroyed because the war happened in France. So that's why he wanted the Germans to be punished severely so that they will not be able to start another war. He also wanted land to be taken from the Germans. The main aim was to make sure that they make Germany to be a weak country. He said the land should be taken from them, their soldiers should be reduced, and they should pay heavy damage for the heavy reparation for the damage that they have caused. So the land was taken from the Germans. For example, we have Dazing became a free city, and then Saar, the region Saar, it was given to France for 15 years, and then Poland was made an independent country, and then the Rhineland became a demilitarized zone, and then also Germany lost overseas colonies. Let's go back to the Rhineland. The Rhineland was a region, or the land between France and Germany. So they said, after the Treaty of Versailles, they said this land, it will become a demilitarized zone, meaning no fortification allowed, no weapons allowed in that region. Anything that has to do with war was not allowed. The main aim was to make sure that Germans should never be able to fight again. That was the main aim. And now this treaty also caused so much, it caused so much bitterness among the German people. Why? Because the punishment was too heavy on the Germans. First of all, we can look at the terms of the treaty, the punishment that was given to the Germans. We are told that Germans lost 10% of its land. The imported industrial areas were taken from Germany and given to other countries. The number of the soldiers were reduced. They were only left with 100,000 soldiers, and these soldiers were not allowed to fight. Can you imagine the big country like Germany to be left with only 100,000 soldiers? It means Germany became defenseless. They could not defend themselves whenever they could be attacked by their enemies. And the German army was their pride. So it caused bitterness. Now, when the number of the soldiers were reduced, it means the main people became unemployed because they lost their jobs, those who were soldiers. That's where starvation came in, because these people who lost their job could not feed their families anymore. And then we are told that the Navy was limited to 15,000 only, and they were not allowed to have an air force, no submarines, and the ships were melted down into scrap metals, which made them vulnerable for attacks from any other countries. That's why they are saying it caused bitterness among the Germans, and they were the only one to be disarmed, and they were forced to sign a war guilt clause. A war guilt clause, it means they should agree that they started the war. And this was one of the clauses that was humiliating to the Germans, because they did not like it, and they knew that they did not start the war. Okay? And now here, the last part here, they are saying the peacemakers of 1919 coped successfully. Who were the peacemakers? The peacemakers, we are referring to the big three. Were they successful? Or were they all satisfied? You can say some were satisfied and some were not satisfied. We can say George Clemenceau was satisfied because most of the things that he was fighting for happened. The heavy damage, the Germans were forced to pay reparation. And then the soldiers that he was fighting for, the soldiers were reduced. We can come to Woodrow Wilson, whether he was satisfied or not. You see, he had 14 points. Among those 14 points, only few were taken into consideration. For example, the League of Nations, because he was the one who came with Woodrow Wilson came with the idea of the formation of the League of Nations to stop countries from fighting. That one, it was taken into consideration, but most of his 14 points were not taken into consideration. That means he was not satisfied like the others. Okay, now we have Britain, France, and USA were satisfied with the terms of the treaty. We can say that those two were satisfied. No, France was satisfied. Two of them were not satisfied because most of their aims were not taken into consideration. We have the League of Nations. The League of Nations, I told you, it was the idea of Woodrow Wilson to bring peace in the world. Okay, now here we are said we already know that the League consisted of three bodies. We have the Assembly, we have the Council, and the Secretariat. All these three had different responsibilities in the League of Nations. However, most of the League's work was done through a number of agencies. These agencies of the League of Nations proved to be much more successful than its main bodies. Okay, we have and the question that you should ask yourself: why do you think the League of Nations? Because the main aim of the League was to stop countries from fighting or to bring peace in the world. Now, what do you think the League of Nations failed to bring peace in the world? The League of Nations was already there from 1920, but still Second World War broke out in 1939. Why? Because this was the organization that was supposed to stop countries from fighting. Now, why do you think the League of Nations failed to bring peace? Before I answer that question, should go through the Assembly, the Mandate Commission. What were the main responsibility of the Assembly in the League of Nations and the Mandate Commission? Okay, we have the structure of the League of Nations. How did this contribute to the failure of the League of Nations? First of all, let's answer the question that I asked: why the League of Nations failed to stop countries from fighting? One of the important reasons was that the strongest powers, the superpowers, were not part of the League of Nations. Countries like Russia, Britain, countries like Russia, USA, and Germany. Those are the three superpowers who were not part of the League. So the League of Nations had no power to stop countries from fighting. These three countries did not join. I hope we all know why the three countries did not join. For example, Germany was not allowed to join the League of Nations because it was accused that they started the First World War. Russia was a communist country. It was not allowed. They even left area when they were fighting in 1915. They stopped. They went back to their country because they were needed back home to bring peace in the country. And USA, the people who came with the idea of the formation of the League of Nations did not join the League of Nations because the senator voted against joining the League of Nations. So with the absence of the superpowers, the three, the League had no way they could stop countries from fighting because it lacked a backup of the strongest country. And then another point why the League of Nations failed or it was not successful, there was no cooperation among the member countries of the League. For example, we have countries like Britain. It was the country that was supposed to offer their soldiers to the League of Nations whenever war broke out. But this country did not do that. Why? Because they felt, or they still have that memory of the First World War. They said their soldiers were killed in numbers during the war, so they could not risk their own soldiers again to die in another war. And they said they had internal problems in their country. They felt they could not solve other people's problems, leaving their own problems at home. Okay, but now they are telling us the League of Nations, although it was a failure, they were successful in other things. Let's give an example of few success of the League of Nations. we have the success of the island. This island was an island between Sweden and Finland. There was a dispute between the two countries. A dispute is a disagreement between two countries. So this a dispute of island was between Sweden and Finland. So how did the League of Nations solve the dispute? They said that the island will be given to the Finnish people, Finland, while the interest of the Swedish will be taken care of the League of Nations. That was a success. And then we have another dispute of Upper Silesia. Upper Silesia was a dispute between Poland and Germany. Both countries claimed it. Both countries wanted to have Upper Silesia. So the rule or the dispute was solved by the League of Nations by dividing between the two. So Upper Silesia was divided between Germany and Poland. And then we have another success where the League of Nations was successful. Memel was a dispute between Germany and Lithuania. In Lithuania, there were both German-speaking people and Lithuanian-speaking people. So the dispute was solved, and the League of Nations said Lithuania should receive Memel. So that was another success. And then we have the League sanctions on Italy. Why do you think it was not successful? It was not successful because the sanctions did not include the sanctions on oil. And most of the countries did not take the things seriously because of the absence of the superpowers. And the League of Nations had no army to enforce their decisions. So countries could not follow the sanctions of the League of Nations. Then that brings us to the collapse of international peace. We have Hitler's foreign policy to rearm Germany. We have Britain and France signed the Munich Agreement. And then we have agreement at the Potsdam Conference in 1945. And then USSR wanted to control most of Eastern Europe by 1946. And then we have the Bay of Pigs incident in April 1961. And then we have nuclear missiles in Cuba. Okay, let's start with Hitler's foreign policy to rearm Germany. When they signed the peace treaty in 1919, it was agreed by the peacemakers that they are going to disarm Germany. But now a man called Adolf Hitler came into being. Now when he came into being, he wanted to reverse the terms of the treaty, the things that they agreed upon when they were signing the treaty. So he started rearming the Germans. Weapons were increased. Remember, they agreed in 1919 that weapons should also be reduced. So what Hitler did, he started rearming, increasing the weapons in Germany, because he said he wanted to bring Germany back to where it was, to how it was before the beginning of the First World War. Because now Germany was weak, now he wanted to make Germany a strong country again. And then so many things happened that makes us understand that the reasons for the collapse of international peace. The Hitler's foreign policy also brought chaos in the world. And then the increasing of the military soldiers also brought chaos. And then, remember I told you that the Rhineland became a demilitarized zone. No such soldiers were supposed to be there. No weapons were supposed to be there. Now, what Hitler did, he sent his soldiers to march in that land where soldiers were not supposed to be. And he told his people that if there will be any opposition from France and Britain, the soldiers should not fight, but they should go back to Germany. But to his surprise was that when the soldiers marched into the Rhineland, Britain and France did not do anything. They kept quiet. Now Hitler took it for granted that these two countries are scared of me, so I'm not going to stop here. I'll make sure that I'll win back the land that was taken from us. Okay, now he even said that we want a living space, and the land that was taken from us when they signed the Treaty of Versailles, it will be taken back to us by force. So that's what he did. He started all those things, rearming the Germans, sending soldiers to the Rhineland. All that led to the collapse of peace, of international peace in the world. This brought leaders because of what Hitler was doing. And then at last, first of all, he also invaded Austria. Remember Austria? It was one of the terms of the treaty. Austria were German-speaking people, but this Austria were not supposed to unite with the Germans. It was one of the punishment that was given to the Germans. But immediately after invading the Rhineland, Hitler said, these two countries are scared of me. I'm not going to stop here. He invaded Austria because Austria were German-speaking people. He wanted those people to come back to Germany. Still, France and Britain kept quiet. They did not warn him. They did not do anything. They kept quiet. So Hitler told himself that they are scared of me. I'll continue. So he went. He did whatever he wanted to do. At last, he decided that I'm going to invade Poland. Poland were also German-speaking people. That was in 1939, around September. He invaded Poland. Now, this time, France and Britain, they said it's too much. We have to stop Hitler because it's getting out of hand. Now, when he invaded Poland, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and that was the beginning of the Second World War in 1939. As they were fighting during the Second World War, the USA, Russia, Britain, and France, they saw that they were winning the war again. Now they decided, what are we going to do to the losers of the war? They said, we are going to meet and we are going to have a conference, a Potsdam conference or Yalta conference. Now, while they were there, they decided to divide Germany into 4 zones amongst themselves. So Germany was divided into 4 powers. The other part was given to Russia, the other part France, USA, and Britain. Remember, Russia wanted to be paid reparation because in 1941, Germany attacked Russia. It was a surprise attack. So most of the people were killed. The soldiers were killed. So Russia was demanding that they wanted to be paid by the Germans. So that year when they divided Germany into 4 zones, the other 3 countries, Russia, Britain, and France, they told Germany that if they want to be paid, they should look for reparation in the zone that was given to them. Okay? And now here we are told that USA wanted to control most of the Eastern Europe by 1946. Why? What was the main aim of USA controlling most of the Eastern Europe? We were told that USA wanted to control most of the Eastern Europe by 1946. The main aim was to spread communism. Remember that USSR and USA were not in too good terms after the end of the Second World War, because USSR was communism and USA was capitalism. So the reason why USSR, Russia, wanted to control Europe was that they wanted to spread communism, an ideology that brought conflicts between the 2 countries, between USA and USSR. It led to the Cold War, What is Cold War? If you know the meaning of Cold War, says here, we can define the Cold War as an ideological conflict mainly between USA and USSR. It was fought without weapons, but caused dangerous hostile relations between the superpowers. They did not physically fight. It was just a war of propaganda, mistrust, because they did not trust each other. They did not trust each other because when they were at the conference, Yalta conference, remember these two countries, they were in good terms. They even fought together on the one side when they were fighting during the First World War. Now when they met at Yalta, Russia had for the first time that USA had nuclear weapons. Now what came to their mind, they thought that why did they kept it as a secret? Now they saw that maybe they kept it as a secret because they wanted to use the nuclear weapons on us. That's where the mistrust started. Conflict started between USA and USSR. So the threat of nuclear war increased hostility between the two sides in the Cold War. We all know, we read through our models, so we know that they went very far, these two countries, because USSR wanted to spread communism, while USA was trying to stop the spread of communism because they were capitalist. Okay? And then we have the Bay of Pigs incident. Now, what happened at the Bay of Pigs? We are told that there were Cubans who ran away from Cuba, from Fidel Castro, because of communism. Now they were in, because it's very close, Cuba and USA. They crossed, they went to USA. Now when they were in USA, those people were called anti-communist, anti-Fidel Castro communists. So those people, while they were there, they organized themselves and they were given a go-ahead by the new president, Kennedy. And Kennedy was the young president. So he told them that they can go and fight people in Cuba. So when they went there, it ended up in a fiesta, a disaster. Because when they landed in Cuba, they landed at a place that was called a Bay of Pigs. It was the name of a place where they landed. That was in 1961 in April. While they were there, they found that Cubans were already waiting for them. So it means these exiles, people who came from, the Cubans who came from USA, some of them were killed, some of them were captured. So it was a disaster. And then the young president of USA was very much humiliated because his people were caught and nothing happened. Okay, and that brings us to the nuclear missiles in Cuba. Okay, now what happened exactly? After the incident of the Bay of Pigs, Fidel Castro thought he needed help from the American attacks. Now he requested if USSR is Russia, if they could help him against the Americans. Now Russia decided to send nuclear missiles in Cuba facing the Americans. Now USSR did that because they wanted to test the Americans. They wanted to test how strong the new president was. They wanted to know if they could sit back or they could demand the removal of the Cuban missiles in Cuba. Okay, we have the Cold War. I think I went through that one already. Cold War, how it happened between the two, and the outbreak of the Second World War. I spoke about that one when Germany invaded Poland, and the two countries, Britain and France, could not take anymore. They declared war on Germany in 1939, and that was the beginning of the Second World War. Let's move on. We have Namibian history, the German rule. Namibia under the Germans. How did the Germans occupy Namibia? We all know why Namibia was occupied by German and what was the living conditions of the Namibian people under the German. For example, when the Germans were here in Namibia, Namibians were treated like foreigners in their own country. People were not free. They became slaves. They were working for white people under harsh conditions. Namibian farm workers were badly treated. Those who worked at the farms of the whites, they were badly treated, beaten, and beaten to the point of death, even killed. And then these workers were paid low wages. They could not even buy necessities for their families. They could not even buy food for their families because the money was not enough. And then workers were subjected to minimum food rations. And as the result, farm workers resorted to steal cattle and hunting wild animals. Because of hunger, they started hunting and stealing cattle of the Nama people, because Nama people were rich in cattle, so they started stealing because of hunger. And the reason why the Germans occupied Namibia was that they were looking for natural resources. And Namibia was good, rich in natural resources. So they occupied Namibia because they were looking for natural resources. And another reason was that German was after the land to resettle the poor Germans and war victims. They wanted poor Germans and war victims to occupy the land in Namibia, and they're also looking for land for agriculture purposes. And then at the end, we find that Germans benefited more than the Namibians, more than the indigenous people, because Namibians never benefited from the natural resources. They even became poor when the Germans were here, because most of their natural resources were taken by the Germans, and they were just working for the Germans as slaves. And then the confiscation of land. When the Germans were here, they took land from us. Remember, the land, that's where people could have their farms, plow here and there, but this land were taken, and Namibians were just from their land, and then the Germans has to take over the best land from the Namibian people. Their cattle were taken by force. Confiscation means taking something by force. So the cattle of the Namibians were taken by the Germans by force. Okay? And then on the other hand, we also benefited while the Germans were here. There are disadvantages and advantages. We benefited. One, Namibians were provided with jobs. Although they were paid little, it was a job. At least they could buy few things for their families. And then they were provided with education. The Germans taught people how to read and write. That was another benefit. And then they were also committed to Christianity. Okay, and the infrastructure were improved. Schools were built in Namibia when the Germans were here. The railway lines, the roads, all those things. So that was that's how we benefited. Okay, and then we have tension between Hereros and Germans. What brought tension between the two? It was because of the confiscation of land and the confiscation of cattle. So the Herero thought it was a theft, daylight theft, because these people were just taking whatever. They were even giving them cattle on credit. If they don't pay on time, they could come and get whatever they wanted to get from their cows. So they said, it's too much, we are losing, the land is taken. And colonial oppression, women were raped in front of their kids. Namibians were beaten, they were paid low wages. Now, the most important thing that triggered tension between the two tribes, between the Hereros and the Germans, were the confiscation of land. Now they started fighting for their land and fighting to take back their cattle. When they started fighting, that was the beginning of the War of National Resistance in 1904. Okay? Then we have Namibia under South African rule. Many things happened under the South African. For example, let's talk about the Odendaal Plan. When they came here, they divided Namibia into 10 homelands. And the 40% was given to the Namibian people, which was not enough because the Namibians were the majority and they were given a small piece of land where they were overcrowded. And this land that was allocated to the Namibian people was not enough. It was barren. Barren means it was not fertile. They could not produce anything from that land. All the things, bad things happened. At the end, that's when SWAPO said enough is enough. They have to start the armed struggle because they said peaceful demonstration were there. Petitions were written for the South African to leave them alone, but they could not do that. That's why at the end they said we are going to start with the armed struggle. Because of time, I'm not going to take much of the time there. And then lastly, how to prepare for your exam. Ensure that you have all the study materials or resources required for this module. Please ensure that you spend enough time reading the prescribed materials and follow the instructions carefully so as to ensure that you do not waste unnecessary time and effort. Take time to first acquaint yourself with the content of the module by reading through the material carefully. Make sure you understand very well how to answer. Always pay attention to the marks allocated to each question and answer accordingly. Never leave any question unanswered or blank. Please try your best to answer the question, but don't go out of topic. Revise your assignment and ask your tutor if you have any problem. Please enjoy this module and good luck with the assessment through assignment and examination. That is part and parcel of your studies. Perseverance is the hard work you do after you get tired of doing the hard work you already did. All the best for your upcoming exam.